The fastest way to misjudge a man is to judge him by what he owns instead of what he knows. Ethan Walker had heard that lesson from his father many years ago, but standing outside his small repair shop on a bright Saturday morning, he doubted anyone driving through town still believed it. His shop sat beside an old two-lane highway just outside Columbus, Ohio. The building was clean but modest. The paint had faded in places. The sign above the entrance had been repaired more than once. Inside, however, every tool had its place. Every machine worked. Every customer who arrived with a problem left with a solution. Ethan preferred it that way. At 43 years old, he had spent most of his life fixing things other people had given up on. Engines. Equipment. Generators. Industrial machinery. Sometimes even people. Across the parking lot, his 10-year-old daughter Lily sat at a picnic table finishing a school project while occasionally looking up to watch her father work. The morning was quiet until the sound arrived. It started as a distant growl before becoming something much louder. Several people near the gas station across the road turned to look. A bright metallic silver Lamborghini appeared around the bend, sunlight flashing across its sculpted bodywork. The supercar rolled slowly toward town, drawing attention from everyone nearby. Ethan glanced up briefly before returning to the engine he was repairing. Expensive cars did not impress him. The Lamborghini slowed as it passed the repair shop. Then, unexpectedly, it pulled into the parking lot. A black SUV followed behind it. The Lamborghini stopped directly in front of the building. Moments later, a tall man stepped out wearing an expensive tailored jacket and sunglasses. Ethan recognized him immediately. Nathan Sterling. Billionaire entrepreneur. Business magazines seemed to feature him every month. Several people from nearby businesses began gathering along the sidewalk. Nathan looked around the property with mild amusement before his gaze settled on the repair shop itself. "This place is still open?" he asked loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. A few people laughed politely. Nathan smiled. "I thought it was abandoned years ago." More laughter followed. Ethan continued tightening a bolt without reacting. Nathan walked a little closer and studied the building again. "You fix cars here?" he asked. Ethan looked up calmly. "Among other things." Nathan glanced toward the garage doors. "Interesting. I would not trust anything worth real money inside a shop that looks like this." The crowd laughed again. Lily looked up from her project. Ethan simply wiped his hands with a shop towel. "Good thing it is not your shop," he said. The answer was calm. Respectful. Almost quiet. That seemed to surprise Nathan more than an argument would have. For a moment the billionaire studied him. Then he shrugged. "Fair enough." He climbed back into the Lamborghini. The engine roared to life. Several people admired the sound as the car slowly rolled toward the highway. Ethan watched it leave for only a second before returning to work. The entire exchange lasted less than 5 minutes. Yet as the Lamborghini disappeared around the corner, Ethan noticed something unusual. A faint hesitation in the engine note. Just a fraction of a second. So brief that nobody else seemed to hear it. Ethan looked toward the road a moment longer. Then he quietly returned to work, unaware that before the day ended, that same Lamborghini would be coming back. For the next 30 minutes, Ethan Walker forgot about the Lamborghini entirely. He finished repairing the industrial compressor sitting in Bay 2, completed paperwork for a local construction company, and helped an elderly customer diagnose a generator problem. The day continued exactly as most Saturdays did. Steady work. Honest conversations. Problems that needed solutions. Lily remained outside finishing her project while occasionally asking questions about science facts she needed for school. Around noon, the sound of sirens drifted faintly from somewhere farther down the highway. Nobody paid much attention. A few minutes later, however, another sound arrived. This one was familiar. The low growl of a high-performance engine. Ethan looked up from his workbench. A black SUV appeared first. Behind it came the silver Lamborghini. But something was different now. The vehicle moved slowly. Much more slowly than before. The engine note sounded uneven. Not dramatic. Not catastrophic. Just wrong. The Lamborghini rolled into the parking lot and stopped near the entrance. This time nobody laughed. Nathan Sterling stepped out looking irritated. Two men from the SUV immediately approached the vehicle and began examining it. Ethan watched quietly from inside the shop. Lily noticed the tension immediately. "They came back," she said softly. Ethan nodded. "Looks that way." One of the men opened the rear engine compartment and connected a diagnostic device. Several minutes passed. Their expressions grew more serious. Nathan folded his arms and paced beside the car. The billionaire's confidence had not disappeared, but impatience was beginning to replace it. Eventually one of the technicians approached him. They spoke quietly. Nathan frowned. Then he glanced toward Ethan's shop. For a brief moment, their eyes met. Ethan simply returned to organizing tools. He had no interest in embarrassing anyone. Another 15 minutes passed. More equipment came out of the SUV. Laptops. Testing devices. Specialized diagnostic tools. The technicians checked system after system. The Lamborghini remained silent. Customers arriving at nearby businesses slowed down to watch. Even people at the gas station across the road had begun paying attention. Expensive cars always attracted attention. Expensive cars that stopped working attracted even more. Lily stepped inside the shop carrying her school project. "Do you think they know what is wrong?" she asked. Ethan glanced through the open garage door. "Not yet." "Do you?" Ethan wiped his hands with a clean towel. "I know something sounds unusual." Lily smiled. "That means yes." Ethan laughed quietly. "That means maybe." Outside, another luxury vehicle arrived. Then another. Apparently additional specialists had been called. For nearly an hour, experts surrounded the Lamborghini. Diagnostic screens flashed. Technical discussions continued. Nobody seemed close to an answer. Ethan never approached the car. Yet several times he found himself listening carefully whenever the engine started briefly during testing. Each time he heard the same thing. The same subtle inconsistency. The same tiny detail hidden beneath the noise of an extremely complicated machine. By mid-afternoon, frustration had become visible on everyone's face except Ethan's. Nathan stood beside the vehicle staring at the growing group of technicians. The repair shop owner quietly watched from across the parking lot. Then, for the first time all day, Nathan walked toward him. The billionaire stopped just outside the garage entrance. Neither man spoke immediately. Finally Nathan looked at him and asked a simple question. "You noticed something earlier, did not you?" Ethan set down the wrench in his hand. The shop suddenly felt very quiet. "Maybe," he said calmly. And for the first time since arriving that morning, Nathan Sterling looked genuinely interested in what Ethan Walker had to say. For several seconds, neither man said anything. The sounds of tools, passing traffic, and distant conversation seemed to fade into the background. Nathan Sterling stood at the entrance of the repair shop while Ethan Walker remained beside his workbench. One man wore a tailored jacket that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. The other wore a blue work shirt stained by years of honest labor. Yet at that moment, the difference seemed less important than the question hanging between them. Nathan finally spoke again. "You heard something, did not you?" Ethan looked past him toward the car. Several technicians were still gathered around it. Diagnostic screens glowed. Expensive equipment sat scattered across the parking lot. "I heard something unusual," Ethan said. Nathan waited. "What?" Ethan shook his head slightly. "Not enough information yet." One of the technicians approached before Nathan could respond. The man carried a tablet and looked frustrated. "We ran another diagnostic sequence," he said. "Everything still checks out." Nathan frowned. "Then why is the car still failing?" The technician hesitated. "We do not know." Ethan quietly returned to organizing tools. He had no interest in inserting himself into a situation he had not been invited into. Yet as the discussion continued, he could not help noticing the same pattern. The experts trusted the computer systems completely. Ethan trusted his ears. About an hour later, a transport truck arrived from a luxury dealership in Columbus. Additional specialists stepped out carrying more equipment. Their arrival drew even more attention from people nearby. Word had spread quickly. The billionaire's supercar was stranded outside a small repair shop. By late afternoon, half the town seemed aware of it. Lily sat inside the office working on her project while occasionally watching events through the window. "There are a lot more people now," she said. Ethan glanced outside. She was right. A small crowd had gathered near neighboring businesses. Curiosity had become entertainment. Nobody expected a resolution. They were simply waiting to see what happened next. Outside, the new specialists began another round of testing. The engine started briefly. Ethan paused in the middle of tightening a bolt. There it was again. The same hesitation. The same subtle interruption hidden beneath the sound of 12 powerful cylinders. It lasted less than a second. Most people would never notice it. Ethan frowned slightly. Something about it bothered him. Not because it sounded severe. Because it sounded familiar. Nearly 20 years earlier, he had worked on a highly specialized industrial power unit that developed a similar symptom. The memory surfaced unexpectedly. Not the exact failure. Just the pattern. An inconsistency that appeared normal until it was examined from the right angle. Ethan watched for another few moments before returning to work. As evening approached, frustration spread through the group of specialists. One by one they eliminated possible causes. Fuel systems. Electronics. Software. Sensors. Cooling systems. Everything appeared normal. Yet the problem remained. Shortly before sunset, Nathan approached Ethan again. This time his expression was different. Less confident. Less amused. "My team has spent 6 hours on this," he said. Ethan nodded. Nathan glanced toward the vehicle. "You still think you heard something?" Ethan looked at the Lamborghini for a long moment. Then he walked a few steps closer. Not to the engine. Not to the computers. Just close enough to listen. The specialists watched him with obvious skepticism. Ethan remained silent. After a few seconds, he looked back at Nathan. "I think everyone is looking in the wrong place." The parking lot suddenly became very quiet. And for the first time all day, every expert in the crowd turned their attention toward the mechanic they had ignored. The silence lasted only a few seconds, but it felt much longer. Every technician standing around the car looked at Ethan Walker as if he had just interrupted a conversation reserved for experts. One of the dealership specialists crossed his arms. "And where exactly do you think we should be looking?" he asked. Ethan did not answer immediately. Instead, he walked slowly around the vehicle. His movements were calm and unhurried. He was not performing for the crowd. He was thinking. The specialists had spent the entire day connected to computers. Ethan spent most of his life listening to machines. To him, there was a difference. He stopped near the rear of the car and looked toward the engine compartment. Then he glanced underneath the vehicle. After a few moments, he stepped back. "Start it again," he said. One of the technicians hesitated. Nathan nodded. The engine came to life. The sound echoed across the parking lot. Powerful. Expensive. Impressive. Yet Ethan focused on something else. He listened carefully for several seconds before raising his hand. The engine shut off. Again. The technician looked annoyed but complied. The engine started once more. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. Then the engine stopped again. The crowd exchanged confused looks. Lily watched from the office doorway. She had seen that expression before. It was the same look her father made whenever he was solving a difficult problem. Finally Ethan opened his eyes. "When did the problem first appear?" he asked. Nathan looked toward his lead technician. The man checked his notes. "About 20 miles before arriving here." Ethan nodded. "And before that?" "Nothing unusual." Ethan looked at the vehicle again. "Did you refuel today?" The technician answered immediately. "Yes." Ethan asked another question. "At the same place you usually do?" This time the man paused. "No." Ethan nodded again. The specialists exchanged glances. One of them quickly pulled up information on a tablet. Another checked service records. Nathan's expression changed slightly. For the first time, the billionaire looked less skeptical and more curious. Ethan walked back toward his shop. "I could be wrong," he said. "But everyone keeps looking for a complex failure." One technician frowned. "What are you suggesting?" Ethan stopped at the garage entrance. "I am suggesting that sometimes expensive machines fail because of simple things." The comment was met with visible skepticism. Yet 30 minutes later, the mood changed. One of the specialists hurried across the parking lot carrying a report. The fuel analysis had revealed a contamination issue. Not enough to trigger obvious warning systems. Not enough to appear immediately in diagnostics. But enough to create intermittent performance problems under certain operating conditions. The lead technician stared at the results. Then he looked toward Ethan. "That is impossible." Ethan smiled faintly. "No. It is just uncommon." Nathan looked from the report to the mechanic standing in front of the small repair shop he had mocked earlier that morning. For the first time, there was no amusement in his expression. Only respect. But although the contamination explained part of the problem, the car still was not running correctly. And as Ethan quietly studied the vehicle once more, he realized there was another issue hidden beneath the first one. Something every expert had missed. The discovery changed the atmosphere immediately. For the first time all day, the experts stopped dismissing Ethan Walker's observations. The contaminated fuel explained why the diagnostics had produced confusing results. It explained the intermittent symptoms. It explained why the vehicle behaved normally during some tests and poorly during others. Yet as technicians began discussing corrective procedures, Ethan remained unconvinced. Something still bothered him. The hesitation he heard earlier was too precise. Too consistent. Contaminated fuel could create irregular performance problems, but this felt different. He stood quietly near the garage entrance watching the specialists work. One by one they reviewed new data. Fuel samples were collected. Filters were examined. Components were inspected. The crowd that had gathered throughout the afternoon remained nearby, curious to see how the story ended. Lily sat beside the office window with her school project forgotten entirely. Even she could tell something important was happening. About an hour later, one of the technicians approached Nathan Sterling with an update. The fuel contamination issue would require service, but according to their analysis, the vehicle should still be operating more smoothly than it was. Nathan immediately looked toward Ethan. The billionaire did not say anything. He did not have to. The expression on his face asked the question for him. Ethan walked back toward the Lamborghini. This time nobody objected. Nobody questioned him. The specialist stepped aside. He slowly circled the vehicle once more. Then he crouched near the rear wheel area and studied something most people ignored. A small section of exposed wiring near a protected mounting point. Nothing looked damaged. Nothing appeared broken. Yet Ethan remained there for nearly a minute. Finally he stood. When was the last software update installed? He asked. One of the technicians answered. 3 weeks ago. Ethan nodded. And when was this component replaced? He pointed toward a recently serviced assembly. The technician checked records on his tablet. About a month ago. Ethan smiled faintly. The crowd saw the smile. So did Nathan. It was the first sign that Ethan had found something. One specialist frowned. What are you seeing? Ethan looked at the group. I think 2 separate repairs were completed correctly. The technician seemed confused. That does not sound like a problem. Ethan nodded. Individually, no. He paused. Together, maybe. Several experts exchanged puzzled looks. Ethan explained carefully. A recent component replacement and a later software calibration appeared to be referencing slightly different operating parameters. Not enough to trigger major fault codes. Not enough to appear obvious in diagnostics. But enough to create subtle communication inconsistencies under specific conditions. The specialists immediately began reviewing technical records. 10 minutes later, one technician looked up from his computer screen with disbelief. Then another. The lead specialist slowly removed his glasses. That cannot be right, he whispered. But the data said otherwise. A rare calibration mismatch had been hiding behind the contaminated fuel issue. One problem had concealed the other. Nathan stared at the vehicle. The experts stared at their screens. Ethan simply folded his arms and waited. Because the mystery was finally beginning to make sense. And if he was right, the solution everyone had been searching for all day was much closer than they realized. The reaction among the specialists was immediate. Conversations that had filled the parking lot all afternoon suddenly became focused and urgent. Laptops reopened. Technical records were reviewed again. Diagnostic sequences were repeated using the new information Ethan Walker had uncovered. The calibration mismatch sounded insignificant when described in simple terms, but the deeper the experts investigated, the more serious it appeared. One technician compared software logs while another reviewed installation records. A third specialist contacted the manufacturer directly. Nathan Sterling stood quietly beside the vehicle watching the process unfold. Earlier that morning he had arrived convinced that money could solve any problem quickly. Now he was discovering that understanding was often more valuable than resources. Ethan returned to his workbench and continued organizing tools. To him, the important part was already finished. He had identified the direction. The experts could follow the path from there. About 40 minutes later, one of the dealership specialists approached him. The man's attitude had changed completely. "We confirmed it," he said. Ethan looked up. The technician nodded. The replacement component was configured correctly. The software update was installed correctly. But the update referenced an older parameter profile. The mismatch only appeared under specific operating conditions. Ethan smiled slightly. That would explain the hesitation. The technician shook his head. Nobody thought to connect the two issues because the contaminated fuel was masking the symptoms. Nearby, Nathan overheard the conversation. He stared at the Lamborghini for several moments before looking toward the repair shop. The crowd that had gathered throughout the day remained surprisingly quiet. Many of them did not fully understand the technical explanation. They understood something else. A mechanic from a small roadside shop had seen what a team of specialists had missed. As evening approached, corrective procedures finally began. Fresh fuel was supplied. System calibrations were updated. Verification testing followed. The process took another hour. During that time Lily brought her father a sandwich from the office refrigerator. "Are they going to fix it?" she asked. Ethan took a bite and nodded. "Looks that way." Lily smiled. "You knew before they did." Ethan laughed softly. "I guessed before they did." She pointed toward the Lamborghini. "That sounds like knowing." Before Ethan could answer, the lead technician approached Nathan and handed him a report. Nathan read it carefully. Then he looked toward the vehicle. The specialist entered the driver's seat and pressed the ignition button. Every conversation stopped. The engine came to life instantly. Smooth. Clean. Different. Ethan heard the change immediately. So did the specialists. The subtle hesitation was gone. The irregular note had disappeared. For the first time all day, the Lamborghini sounded exactly as it should. The technician slowly pulled onto the highway and accelerated away. Several minutes later he returned with a smile visible from half a parking lot away. The repair was successful. Applause broke out among some of the spectators. Others simply stared at Ethan. Nathan remained silent. Not because he was upset. Because he was thinking. Earlier that morning he had laughed at the shop. Now he found himself looking at it very differently. And as he walked toward Ethan one more time, everyone nearby sensed that something important was about to happen. The crowd expected celebration. Some expected an argument. A few expected Nathan Sterling to pretend none of it had happened. Instead, the billionaire walked across the parking lot and stopped in front of Ethan Walker without saying a word. The evening sun hung low over the highway, casting long shadows across the repair shop. Nearby, the Lamborghini sat quietly, finally operating exactly as it should. For several moments, neither man spoke. Then Nathan looked around the property. The faded sign above the garage. The well-used tools visible through the open doors. The customers still waiting patiently near the office. Earlier that day, he had seen only the building. Now he was beginning to notice the man who worked inside it. "I owe you an apology," Nathan said. The parking lot became completely silent. Ethan leaned against his workbench and folded a shop towel. "For what?" Nathan almost laughed. "You know exactly for what." Ethan smiled slightly but said nothing. Nathan shook his head. "I came here this morning and judged everything in about 10 seconds. He glanced toward the Lamborghini. That turned out to be a mistake. Several people nearby exchanged surprised looks. Public apologies were not common from people like Nathan Sterling. The billionaire continued. "My team has access to resources most companies never see. Specialists. Engineers. Software developers. Yet somehow you heard something all of us missed." Ethan shrugged. "You had a difficult problem." Nathan looked directly at him. "No. You solved a difficult problem." The sincerity in his voice caught everyone's attention. Even the specialist standing nearby seemed uncomfortable accepting how much credit belonged to Ethan. One of them finally stepped forward. "He is right," the technician admitted. "If Ethan had not pointed us in the right direction, we would probably still be chasing the wrong failure." Another specialist nodded. Then another. The acknowledgement spread naturally through the group. Nobody seemed eager to admit it, but nobody could deny it either. Lily stepped out of the office carrying her backpack. She stopped beside her father and looked at the crowd with visible confusion. "Why is everybody staring?" she asked quietly. Several people laughed. Ethan smiled. Long day. Nathan looked at Lily. Your father is very good at what he does. Lily nodded immediately. I know. The answer arrived so quickly that it made everyone laugh again. But there was something powerful hidden inside those two words. She never doubted him. Not once. Nathan looked back toward Ethan. Most people spend their lives trying to prove how important they are, he said. You spent the whole day trying to solve a problem. Ethan glanced toward the repair shop. That is usually enough. The billionaire remained silent for a moment. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and removed a business card. Not as a reward. Not as a transaction. As a gesture of respect. Ethan accepted it politely and placed it inside his shirt pocket without even reading it. That seemed to impress Nathan more than anything else. The crowd slowly began dispersing as the evening grew darker. Customers returned to their lives. Specialists packed their equipment. Traffic resumed along the highway. Yet before leaving, Nathan looked back at the repair shop one final time. The building had not changed. The sign was still faded. The walls were still old. But somehow it looked completely different now. Because once you recognize real value, it becomes impossible to overlook it again. The story should have ended there. The car was repaired. The specialists left satisfied. Nathan Sterling had apologized. Most people would have considered the day finished. Yet over the following weeks, something unexpected happened. The event refused to disappear. Videos recorded by people standing near the repair shop began circulating online. A customer had captured the moment technicians surrounded the Lamborghini. Another person had recorded part of Nathan's public apology. Someone else had posted a short clip showing Ethan quietly returning to work while everyone else discussed the repair. None of the videos were dramatic. That was precisely why people watched them. There was something unusual about seeing a man refuse attention after earning it. Ethan paid almost no attention to any of it. The repair shop remained busy. Equipment still broke. Customers still needed help. Bills still arrived every month. Life continued exactly as before. One Tuesday morning, however, a black sedan pulled into the parking lot. A woman stepped out carrying a camera bag and a notebook. She introduced herself as a business journalist from a national publication. Ethan immediately looked uncomfortable. I think you want somebody else, he said. The reporter smiled. Actually, I came because everyone says that is exactly what you would say. Ethan sighed quietly. Within the next month, several articles appeared. Most focused on the contrast between the billionaire and the mechanic. Others focused on the repair itself. But a few writers noticed something deeper. They wrote about expertise. About experience. About how people often confuse appearance with ability. Those stories spread the fastest. One afternoon, Nathan called unexpectedly. Ethan almost let the call go to voicemail. Almost. How is the shop? Nathan asked after they exchanged greetings. Busy. Nathan laughed. I expected that. There was a short pause. Then the billionaire explained why he was calling. His company operated several industrial facilities across multiple states. They regularly relied on outside specialists for maintenance and diagnostics. Nathan wanted Ethan to visit one of the locations. Not because something was broken. Because he wanted his engineering teams to meet someone who approached problems differently. Ethan initially declined. Nathan expected that too. The conversation ended politely. 2 days later, Lily changed everything. She found the invitation sitting on the kitchen table. You should go, she said immediately. Ethan looked up from reviewing invoices. Why? Lily shrugged. Because sometimes helping people fix problems is bigger than fixing machines. Ethan stared at her for several seconds. Then he laughed softly. It was difficult arguing with wisdom delivered by a 10-year-old. A week later, he visited one of Nathan's facilities. Engineers, managers, and specialists filled the building. Many expected a presentation. Others expected technical explanations. Instead, Ethan spent most of the day asking questions. Observing equipment. Listening to employees. Watching how people worked. By the end of the visit, several engineers admitted they had learned more from his questions than from many formal training sessions. As Ethan drove home that evening, he thought about how strange life could be. A few weeks earlier, a billionaire had laughed at his repair shop. Now that same billionaire was introducing him to executive teams across the country. And somehow, Ethan still felt exactly like the same mechanic who opened his garage doors every morning before sunrise. 3 years later, very little had changed about Ethan Walker's repair shop. The sign above the building was still slightly faded. The same workbenches stood inside. The same tools hung neatly along the walls. Every morning Ethan unlocked the front door before sunrise and started another day of work. Success had brought new opportunities, but it had never changed his priorities. Customers still arrived with problems. Machines still needed repairs. Life remained simple. One bright autumn afternoon, however, several unfamiliar vehicles pulled into the parking lot. Employees stepped out carrying equipment and setting up cameras. Lily, now 13 years old, looked out the office window and smiled immediately. "It is happening again," she said. Ethan glanced outside. "What is?" "People coming here because of you." Ethan laughed quietly and continued working. The visitors were part of a national business organization preparing a documentary series about leadership, expertise, and innovation. Over the previous few years, Ethan's story had continued spreading through engineering circles, manufacturing groups, and business communities. Not because he became famous. Because people recognized something rare. He never chased attention. He chased solutions. Later that afternoon, another familiar vehicle arrived. Nathan Sterling stepped out and walked toward the shop. The billionaire looked exactly the same as he had years earlier, except now there was genuine warmth in his smile. Ethan met him near the garage entrance. "You still have not changed the sign," Nathan said. Ethan looked up at it. "It still works." Nathan laughed. "That answer explains everything." The documentary crew spent several hours filming conversations with customers, employees, engineers, and local business owners. Again and again, people described the same quality. Ethan listened before he spoke. He observed before he acted. He never assumed. As the sun began setting, the producers asked if they could record one final interview. Ethan reluctantly agreed. The question seemed simple. "What is the most important lesson you learned from all of this?" Ethan thought for a moment. Across the parking lot, Lily was helping a customer carry supplies. Nathan was speaking with several local business owners. The repair shop remained busy despite the cameras. Everything important was happening exactly where it always had. Ethan finally answered. "Most people think value announces itself." The crew listened carefully. But some of the most valuable things in life are quiet. A person. A skill. An opportunity. A machine trying to tell you what is wrong. If you stop paying attention to appearances and start paying attention to details, you find things other people miss. The crew thanked him. The cameras shut down. The interviews ended. Evening settled across the highway. One by one, the visitors packed their equipment and left. Nathan prepared to leave as well. Before climbing into his car, he looked back at the repair shop. "You know," he said, "that day with the Lamborghini probably changed my life more than it changed yours." Ethan smiled. Maybe. Nathan shook his head. Definitely. They exchanged a handshake. Nothing dramatic. Nothing theatrical. Just mutual respect. As the last vehicle disappeared down the road, Lily walked over and stood beside her father. Together they looked across the parking lot toward the fading sunlight. "Do you ever think about that day?" she asked. Ethan smiled softly. "Sometimes." Lily nodded. "Good thing the car broke down." Ethan looked toward the highway for a long moment. Then he laughed quietly. Maybe it was. And with that, he switched off the lights above the garage door, locked the shop, and headed home with his daughter, leaving behind the same small repair shop that the world had finally learned not to underestimate.